So while we're waiting, we've got our last speaker who's hitting us home. And Nicole Thomas was born and raised in New London, Connecticut. Nicole is a passionate local historian who has dedicated over 2 decades to uncovering and preserving the city's rich and often overlooked past. She currently serves as the Assistant Site Administrator for the Southeast Region of Connecticut Landmarks and as co-chair of the New London's Black Heritage Trail, a committed community activist. She is also the personal manager at the local New London Homeless Hospitality Center and holds seats on several local historic boards as well as the Zoning Board and Appeals for the City of New London. Her journey into history began unexpectedly in 2003 when her mother purchased a home bearing a historic plaque, what she fondly refers to as the start of a 22-year rabbit hole. Since then, she has been deeply involved in connecting London's present to its layered and diverse past. A proud mother of 2 daughters, she brings some dedication and heart to her family, community, and historical work. So, Nicole Thomas.
So while they get the presentation together, I just want to say that thank you to the Berlin, excuse me, I heard about that yesterday, and it's a certain way that you say Berlin. Did I get it right, Berlin?
Yeah.
Berlin Action Team. I thank you guys all for being here today. I'm very, very excited to be here. What Chris just read sounds like this amazing person, and I got to tell you, I still get nervous every single time I do this, even after presenting with national tours. So while they get the presentation up, we'll just wait a second, and we'll get to moving once it's up.
So I've got some postcards about the film, and there's 2 sides to them, so there's plenty of reading. I'll just stick them up here if anybody's interested.
Okay. We'll figure it out. Yeah, we'll do it. Oh, we need to phone Frank. Okay.
Yeah, that's the other thing that will offer.
Yeah, this will go. Click off.
All right. Okay. So, my name is Nicole Thomas, and I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. I start all my talks like that because I feel that that is true. I definitely feel as though, not just myself, but all of you that are sitting in this room are all your ancestors' wildest dreams. We have a history among us where people were not able to do some of the things that we're able to do today. So I want to tell you guys all about that. But first I'm going to start with my mother having purchased that house and kind of where that begins my journey. So 2003, the house where it all began, as Chris mentioned previously, and I have a tendency to turn this way, so if you can't hear me, just let me know. As Chris pointed out, 2003, my mother purchased the house after spending many years dragging all of us to multiple houses throughout town and finding the one that was a fit for us. Not every house was going to have a plaque on it. Not every house was going to speak to me. But this particular house did, and I don't know if you guys can see it, but I'm just going to point very briefly. Back here, there's a plaque, and it says Mary Jane Carroll, 1895. The reason why that has some significance to me is because I'm a historian. Little did I know at that particular time that that was who I was going to be for the remainder of my days, and something that would spark an interest in me. But that plaque was important to me because it had a woman's name on it. It was not common. You didn't hear that very, very often at all. And I've lived in New London my entire life. Now, some of the criteria to have a plaque is that it has to be 50 years old. You have to have the original owner's name, and somebody has to have researched that particular house. And so for me, I'm nosy. guys. I had to know more about this woman, kind of what was going on with her, and again, why there was a woman's name on that plaque. So my mother moves in this house, 2003. It is my senior year of high school. Not long after I graduate high school, I give birth to my oldest daughter, who is sitting in the back of this room today, my beautiful 21-year-old. But that kind of alludes to the fact that I've been down a 23-year rabbit hole because, again, she bought this house, and I just had to know more about the woman who lived here, more about the people who inhabited this house. And when I went to go find out about it, I found you can't see it in the picture, but there's a widow's peak at the top of the house. And I really had to know about that, like I said, the people who occupied this house prior to. So I got to researching. I went down to a place called New London Landmarks, and I started getting information. Some of that information was a little bit scary. They were talking about ghosts and things in the house and voices and things that they heard. I didn't want anything to do with any ghosts, so I said I'm gonna find out about the people that are actually still around here today. So that's what I did. May 5th of 2018, I was invited by New London Landmarks to host a Jane's Walk. My daughter's laughing at me in the background. She's probably like, I can't stand this picture. So that's me over in that corner on the left-hand side. They asked me to lead a Jane's Walk, and a Jane's Walk is something that people do every year. It gets people into in the community to go out, give a history of the places they have been, the things they have learned, and knowledge that they've gained around town. I took a walk in New London around Granite Street in that neighborhood because it was interesting to me. And again, the reason why that was so interesting to me at that particular time was because it talked about some of the bigger houses in the city. It talked about the people who had lived there, the places that they had run, what they had done. And then I went to work at a thrift store. Now, a lot of people in this room would not obviously know this, but the people who know and love me do know. I took myself down a pretty hard descent of alcoholism and having to get myself back on track. So this is something that actually helped me with that. Didn't expect that I would be in that place in life, but something kind of just grabbed me. As I was trying to get myself out of that, I had to find something that was interesting to me and something that would pull me in and make me feel a renewed sense of life. A lot of people don't like to talk about that, but that is part of my journey, and so I do bring that up as a part of the reason why I am who I am today and how I am. I say that mainly because we never know who we're helping. What we say, what we do, our stories, and our truth. But my kids went through that a lot with me. So, June of 2016, June 14th specifically of 2016, I decide to get sober, I take myself away, I come back home, and then I'm working at a thrift store. I'm volunteering because I had to get some community service done. Not something that was on my radar, but I had to do what I had to do, so I go ahead and I get that done. I end up at a thrift store downtown New London. It's called Homeward Bound Treasures. As I'm there, I'm stocking shelves, selling stuff to people, not something that you would think was important, but while I was in school, I gave a talk in Groton, Connecticut this morning, and my cousin would tell you that she was my kindergarten teacher, my first grade teacher, and she was teaching me about the history of the enslaved and the families, Juneteenth and all of that for years prior. So like I said, I'm at that thrift store, and again, you never know who you're helping, and you never, like I tell my kids when they leave the house, you don't know who knows who, and you don't know who knows you, right? So you're talking to people, and you never know what comes up from that. So I'm at the thrift store, there's a woman named Barbara, and she's down there, and I am so obsessed with local history at this point because of that plaque. Once I started on that descent down that rabbit hole, I had to know more about everything in town. I just wanted to know more about the plaques, the people. But what I was finding was I was finding old New Londoners, people who had been, colonists or just older white men. I wasn't hearing a lot about the women. I wasn't hearing a lot about a lot of people. So Barbara overhears me, and she hears me talking about the local history, and she says to me, have you been to the Hempstead houses lately? I know you probably would have gone in school on a field trip, but have you been there as of late? And I said, no, I haven't been there in years. And to me, it was a shuttered old house. Nobody had had the doors open for a regular amount of time. Never really got to go inside. So, June of 2018, I get invited to a sleepover. Actually, they said, we're gonna have a community campfire, would you come? The day before, my old boss tells me, oh, by the way, we're gonna do a sleepover, and we're gonna sleep in the garret of the Hempstead houses. Now, I thought the lady was crazy. I'm like, I'm not doing that. There's no way I'm sleeping in this old historic house. By the way, the house dates to 1678, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So, is anybody familiar with this guy on the screen? So I'm saying we got two in here, and I know you guys, my kids know. So this is Joseph McGill. His name, he founded and created something called the Slave Dwelling Project. The reason why Joe does what he does is that the majority of people, when you go out and about and you're looking at these older homes and you're wanting to learn about your country's history, you might hear about Mount Pillier. You will hear about Mount Vernon. You will hear about Monticello. Everybody knows who those names are associated with, right? We know George Washington. We know Thomas Jefferson. The last one I'm forgetting already, but we do know those, thank you. We do know those names and we know them really well at the top of our heads. But we don't tend to know about the places where the enslaved slept. Joe comes down to the Hempstead houses because it was a slave dwelling. So we have a series of community campfires. We have the whole community come out. Right there, of course, is myself. In between myself and my friend Diane is my friend Tom Shook. Actually, he was able to provide some of the slides towards the end of this show today. And Tom is my co-researcher on New London's Black Heritage Trail. I'll tell you guys about that here shortly. So, like I mentioned, we have a community campfire, and we do this on the property. We sit out and we talk about everybody that, or we talk about everything. We talk about monuments, we've talked about the Confederacy, we've talked about things that have been riling up the country. This year we didn't end up doing a whole community campfire. It rained a little bit, people left a little bit early, but that was okay. But this is kind of what our community campfire looks like. But we will bring up a lot of stuff. So we talk about everything that is on our mind. So again, this current political scheme, it would have been a good time to talk about that this year because there is a lot going on. But I think what's happening right now is that people are just automatic, they're just very, very tired. I know I am of the things that are going on in this country. So we have a bunch of people coming out. I don't know why that's sliding on the screen this way, but it's not showing all the way. So I end up at the NAACP dinner, which they have every year. I'll be going again this year. And I end up with, now I know some people are probably familiar with this man on the screen, Mr. Ben Crump. And that's myself and my old boss. So we go to the NAACP dinner. We're having a lot of good conversation. This is not something that Joseph McGill ends up making his way to. But like I said, Joe's whole mission for the Slave Dwelling Project is so that we do not forget the places where the enslaved have slept. A lot of times what happens is, and actually Joe wrote a book called Sleeping with the Ancestors last year. In his book, he details how in the cover of Night, there was a woman who knew that she had an existing slave cabin on her property. What she decides to do, once Joe makes her aware of the fact that one of the things on her property is a slave dwelling, she tears it down in the cover of Night. We've already lost enough of our history, folks. We cannot afford to lose any more. So we really do have to be careful and very, very intentional about the conversations that we're having, about the things that we're doing here in this country today. So like I mentioned, we go to that we go to that dinner. I get to meet Attorney Ben Crump. At the time, he's obviously known in the media, known in the news, but today we all know him for being on pretty much everything that has to deal with a lot of our history. I don't know. We might have to fix this if able. Yeah, I'm saying, can we fix this if able? I don't know if it is full screen. We'll see if we can fix it. I'm saying that clock can't be right, is it? No. Do we full screen it? Maybe that would be out. Just a minute, folks, while we fix this. Is it in front? I'm still going to hold this because it's habit. All right. Okay, I will. All right, so the first slide, actually, can we go back to the other slide just really quickly, just that last one there. There we go. So that's kind of how I got here and where I am today, how I got to a 23-year rabbit hole, because it has been a 23-year rabbit hole. From time to time, I'm looking into one thing on one end, and before you know it, you're down another hole, you get some more information, and things grab you when you're talking about local history. They just do, they grab you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Adam Jackson, his legacy, and where I work at the Hempstead houses, kind of how his story comes about, and I'll be reading a couple of these plaques and stuff to you. If you want to go on to the next slide, that would be great. So you're looking at the 1678 Hempstead houses. Now, I'm going to just point out on the left-hand side of the house, if you notice, there are some diamond pane windows. That's actually the older section of our home. On the right-hand side of our house is the 1728 side. Now, keep this image in mind as we move forward in the presentation, because this is where Adam Jackson actually ends up living for 30 years of his life. However, he does not come here until about 1727, when he's about 27 years of age. So it's important just to keep this house in mind, because for 30 years, this is where he resides. So we can scroll on to the next slide. Here on this page is a picture of Joshua Hempstead's diary. It's very hard to have a conversation about Adam Jackson, who was enslaved at the house, without mentioning the Hempstead family and their legacy. One I grapple with on a daily basis, because if it wasn't for Joshua Hempstead, we wouldn't have all the records we have of Adam Jackson. So just a quick rundown on Joshua Hempstead. Joshua Hempstead is born in 1678. We know that he's born the year that the house is completed because he writes it in his diary. Joshua Hempstead keeps a diary from 1711 until 1758. So that's a period of 47 years. Can you imagine what type of stuff was written in that amount of time? So he's writing about the weather. He's writing about the things that he purchases, the things that he's weighing. Joshua Hempstead likes to weigh everything. He's pretty frugal. He doesn't like to spend a lot of money. But he writes about everything. So this is kind of what one of those pages would look like. As you can probably imagine, he makes his own paper, and he writes down pretty much everything that's going on around town, everything that's going on with anybody he may have enslaved, or anybody that he deals with on a regular basis. Joshua Hempstead is a shipwright, a wheelwright. His father unfortunately passed away when Joshua was about 10 years of age. So he has a lot of skill, but he is apprenticed out and goes to live with some other family members and is able to learn how to work and, like I said, be that shipwright, be that wheelwright. So he would have known how to work with wood, things of that nature, how to, pretty much put things together for a ship. So if we want to go to the next one, here's just another page of Joshua Hempstead's diary. On one of these pages, and I didn't pull out the actual one, on one of these pages, he actually talks about when he purchases Adam Jackson. That is the September 21st of 1727, after Joshua purchased him September 21st of 1727, after the man that Adam Jackson is living with, Samuel Fox, passes away. But we'll get back into that and how that story gets started here in a little bit. So we can move on to the next slide, and I think that's my plaque. So here's my plaque for New London's Black Heritage Trail. We unveiled the trail in October, it was October of 2021. So I'll just read the plaque to you very quickly. This just says, Adam Jackson was born into chattel slavery in around 1700 and separated from his mother 3 years later. In 1727, Joshua Hempstead purchased Jackson for 85 pounds. Hempstead was nearing 50. His sons were grown and starting families of their own. Jackson's unpaid forced labor allowed Hempstead to continue farming profitably, to build an addition on his house, and to serve as justice of the peace. Hempstead also bartered Jackson's labor for goods and services from at least 70 local men and women. Jackson plowed, threshed hay, carted goods, made cider, and was a skilled animal handler. At Hempstead's death in 1758, his estate inventory included an old Negro man named Adam. The next year, after nearly 60 years of enslavement, Jackson shows up on tax rolls as a free man owning a small amount of property. He disappears from the historical record in 1765. Isn't that amazing? That Adam, for all of his life, with the exception of the time after Joshua Hempstead passes away, has no freedom. Adam is born a slave and damn near dies one. I could not imagine that existence today. But one thing I can imagine is how he would have felt. His mother, Joan Jackson, has a long story herself. But let me just dial back a little bit. So Adam's family starts out with his grandmother, Maria. Maria is listed in historic records a number of times, but we don't have a lot of documentation on her. Maria is listed in the records as Maria, deaf and dumb. So that tells you what you might need to know about how Joan came into existence. I don't have to paint the picture, I see the writings on the wall. Sometimes I do spell it out insanely, and sometimes it's harder to do because it is painful to remember that history. Maria is listed as deaf and dumb, which means she could not speak. She could not do much of anything for herself. Joan Jackson is recorded in historic records as Joan the mulatto. She may have looked like me. Again, a story that tells itself. And sometimes I tell people, if you listen long enough, the story will tell itself. Joan likely was the product of the Rogers family, the white colonists. Years later, Joan Jackson, daughter to either James or John Rogers, and I won't even get you into the long sordid story of the Rogerines because we could be here all day about that. But it is worth looking into. If you've never heard of the Rogerines, it's worth looking into. They were a pretty eccentric religious sect, and they wanted things their way. They could be found on a Sunday daubing feces on a meeting house, carting shoes down the lanes so that they could get in trouble and end up in jail. But John Rogers was instrumental in being helpful to Adam's father. Adam's father, John Jackson, actually comes into the picture around 1686. By 1700, to the Rogers family, he's enslaved. By 1700, John Jackson has gained his freedom. We do not know the circumstances behind this gain for John, but we do know that when people were enslaved, either coming from Africa and or the West Indies, they were known to be of the weaker variety when they were brought here. So where they had come from, they would have shipped people down to the Caribbean islands or wherever because they would have been strong, been able to hold themselves up and hold on to labor and be able to work as hard as they needed to work. But John was listed as a weaker variety. Please allow me to tell you how untrue that is, okay? John Jackson, like I mentioned, comes here, gains his freedom by 1700, marries Adam's mother, Joan Jackson. How that comes to fruition, we're not entirely sure. We do know that these things are recorded in Joshua's records because Joshua does spend some time in his property marrying either the enslaved, the indigenous, African Americans. He marries, even some colonists actually marrying some indigenous and or African Americans, which was somewhat rare for the time. So he marries Joan Jackson. But Joan Jackson is still enslaved at this particular time. 1703, the Rogers give Joan Jackson her freedom. She's about 7 months pregnant, but that is a very short-lived situation. By 1710, or no, I'm sorry, she wasn't 17 months pregnant at that time. By 1710, Joan Jackson is again re-enslaved because the Rogers family are fighting within themselves. John Rogers' sister Bathsheba Fox, now she's been married to Samuel Fox, claims that when their father, James Rogers, passed away, that Joan was left to him. So there's a bunch of family infighting going on. Joan at this time is expecting her child, her seventh child, or she's 7 months pregnant. There's a lot to the story, and I do apologize because sometimes I do forget my timelines. But I will give you guys as full a story as I can. We can go to the next slide, actually. So the Jackson family is actually documented in 30 years of court cases because of this fighting. They have to go back and forth over time. And if you notice over here on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see John Jackson, and it's Jones versus Jackson. At some point, Joan and her youngest children, Jack and Rachel, are actually taken over to the Long Island, Fisher's Island area, somewhere in between the two. There's really not conclusive evidence as to which at this point, but they're taken over there. In the cover of night, a really, really late evening, 2 men row across the river. They kidnap Joan and her 2 children. And when they get back to land and the person wakes up the next day, I say the person on purpose, I'm not glorifying enslavers here. I refuse to do so. Their names are not important to me at this particular point. It's important to know where they come from. It's important to know who the people are. But for me, we're talking about Adam and that Jackson family and their legacy. So those particular family members go missing. We don't know where they're coming from at this particular point. Now, they're hidden somewhere around the Groton area for a long period of time. Eventually, they are caught and re-enslaved. But John Jackson never stops fighting for his family's freedom. Ever. Go to the next slide. Actually, before we do that, you'll notice, like I said, a number of times here, this is actually written down here. You notice down that line, there's some of the DeWolfs, which are actually some of the largest enslavers in Rhode Island. The Jacksons are there. You'll notice that there's the Beebes versus the Rogers. So there was those names go in between the family members here with the Rogerines. And that name on the bottom. Oh, then you have the Beebes versus the Fox. This here in the center is the diary of Joshua Hempstead. That diary is not only just 47 years, it spans 711 pages. So imagine how much information is in that book for 47 years. Quite a bit of it is listed there. On the right-hand side, there's the book For Adam's Sake. That is written by Allegra de Bonaventura. She's actually a professor at Yale. I've been in contact with her quite a bit. She actually wrote this book for Adam's sake because Adam's story was not being told properly. When Allegra goes to write this book, what she started doing was she comes down to the Hempstead houses, she goes to stay at the house, and she comes up initially, and she's writing a book about Joshua Hempstead, a father in colonial New England. Joshua Hempstead's wife Abigail passes away at some point after the birth of their 9th child, a little girl named Molly. She passes away, and Joshua Hempstead does something insanely unusual for colonial times. He never remarries. But at this particular point, he has Adam Jackson and his grandsons in the house, so he's able to kind of go for a little while, and he doesn't need to have. So he sends Molly and her younger sister, he had 2 younger girls, he sends Molly and her younger sister over to Long Island to be with Abigail's sisters so that they can help to raise them. And I think Joshua's pretty funny when you read the diary and he's coming back to town with the 2 girls. He weighs Molly to see how much she's going to cost him. So he always wants to know, how much is this going to cost? So you can imagine that he has Adam's forced labor. He's having that to free up his time. So yes, Allegra writes that, and as she's going through the book, as she's going through the actual diary, mind you, she went through legitimate transcripts, the actual diary, which you can find today at the New London County Historical Society. So 95 pages, she realizes that that's where they're talking about Adam. And she tries to figure out, who is this Adam character? I don't know who he is. I've never heard of him before. Nobody's given birth to this kid, and that has been listed in the diary. Who is he? That's when she comes across the September 21st of 1727 and realizes that Adam is an enslaved man who was purchased by Joshua Hempstead. Next slide, please. So here's my page for New London's Black Heritage Trail. I did fail to put the QR code on here today, but if you would like, I can give you guys information after this presentation. Down here on the bottom right-hand corner and the first side on the left, you'll notice that there's a pallet on the floor. That is where Adam would have slept in the garret, and myself have slept there a number of times in June. I do not recommend it in July and August. It is nasty, it is hot, there may be bats, we don't want that. However, June, it's okay. I've slept in this house 3 or 4 times. Like I said, 1678 house, I gotta tell you, it is the best night of sleep that I get every single year. It might be because I have kids, it could be because I have dogs, or it might just be because it's a very comfortable house. There's really no telling. But I slept over there, so as you're looking at this, and I'm just gonna run to the screen really quickly, as you're looking at this particular space is where you're sleeping. So up here is where this space is, okay? So that's where Adam would have slept. Now, you can't see on the right-hand side of the house, but there's doors on the outer side. When that wasn't like that and that right-hand side of the house was not built over above the porch, there would have been a staircase that would have been there, or kind of a rope staircase that Adam would have had to climb up. At one point, Adam actually breaks his leg, and Joshua does let him rest downstairs so as not to further exacerbate his injuries. One important thing about Adam that I'd like to point out, people always have this question for me, and they want to know, why didn't Adam run away? Why didn't he go and take off and try to find, freedom in any particular way? Well, you think about it. His family lived around the corner. By the way, I didn't mention that, but his family was right around the corner. They were all pretty much, now New London's 5.5 square miles above water. It's really not a very large town at all. Where would he have run to? What was he running away from? Everything he knew, all of his family was right there. So Adam does have very subtle hints of resistance in the diary. He ends up in the jail cell at one point, and he waits until the warden falls asleep, and then he takes off. There's times where Joshua mentions in the diary and says Adam was nothing today. Basically meaning that Adam was resisting and did not do any work that Joshua may have wanted him to do. So some of those things are important. One other thing that I'd like to point out, like I said, that 30-year court case, one thing we never seem to get from the enslaved, and one thing we definitely do not get, we maybe see subtle things of it in the North, but you definitely wouldn't have seen it in the South. During that 30-year court case, a court reporter actually reports to Joshua Hempstead that Adam, in his own words, said to him, "John and Joan Jackson are my parents." Those words are incredibly impactful for me for a number of reasons. Number one, if we're talking about even Northern and mostly Southern slavery, you would not have had your lineage, your descendancy, who you came from, or who your parents were, who your family was. You wouldn't have had that knowledge. Adam was able to have that. There's another time in October 25th of 1725, because the first time Adam appears on record in Joshua Hempstead's diary is October 25th of 1725. They mentioned that Black Adam had a child age 5 died today. A lot of people sense that that is speculation. I am not so sure about that. I need to do further research, but I didn't mention this previously, but I did mention that Joan Jackson was actually enslaved and lived in the Rogers family farm. She had allegedly, there was a man named Adam the Mulatto that lived on that property. Adam was not a very common enslaved name in that time, okay? So there was Adam the Mulatto. She mentions that there's Adam Jackson, who was her son, and we believe that Adam the Mulatto may have been Joan's brother. So if you kind of think about that, they referred to that Adam the Mulatto as Adam the Mulatto in any record that was recorded there. They did not refer to Adam Jackson that way. So Pat Schaefer, who actually wrote the companion to the diary, A Useful Friend, tells us and believes that that is an error. I am not so sure about that. Adam does not have his family. He doesn't have a wife. He doesn't have children that we know of. He doesn't carry on any other family legacy except for being with the family that we are aware of. So could it be speculation? Could it be the truth? There's no telling, but further research is required. We can move on to the next slide. So again, that is kind of part of Adam's story. It is not a full story. We do have limited time today. I would love to tell you guys much more about it. Right now, our house is shuttered for the season as we're doing restoration work. Go figure, the side of the house that Adam Jackson actually slept in, lived in, and worked in is the most sound part of our house. The right-hand side, where everybody else would have had to help to build, is actually slacking a little bit. So the house is closed. And when they told us that the most secure portion of the house was where Adam Jackson slept, I just said, go figure. Go figure. Not really shocked. So I'm happy to provide more answers about Adam here in a little bit. We do want to move on to another story, but I do want to show you this before we do move on. Oh, you were right. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So in this particular inventory here, there's an inventory of Joshua Hempstead. I did not get the full inventory up there for you, but what's interesting about this situation is that Adam is listed at the bottom of Joshua Hempstead's inventory. He is listed after the cattle. I'm sure we've seen that before. That means Adam worked for 64 years, forced labor. He ends up in an almshouse with very, very little to his name. And then he disappears from historic record. To this day, we have currently no idea where Adam Jackson is buried. We do not know where John Jackson is buried. We have no idea where Joan is buried. We do know that Adam's sister Miriam was sold into a property in Norwich, Connecticut after she was freed from slavery. We don't know if she had any, well, we do know that Miriam had children and did get to marry. We don't know what happened to any of those children afterwards. One actually was, and that was Jack, actually ends up in a Newport, Rhode Island home and is listed as a squatter after years of enslavement. So those are all of the facts and details that we have about Adam Jackson. I have to tell you though, the fact that we don't know where Adam Jackson is buried today means nothing to me. I have every intention of finding out how to get this ground penetrating radar, how to move forward with Adam's story, and where and how to find him. To me, today, and I'm sure my kids would agree, Adam Jackson is family. The Jackson family is my family. I do not get the privilege to stop looking for them, because to me, they are part of my heart today. So now I want to tell you a little bit about Hercules and the Negro governors. So we'll move forward to that. And then I get you folks out of here. I know you all been sitting tight all day. So this is the story, another story on New London's Black Heritage Trail. And this is the plaque of Florio Hercules, the wife of Hercules, who was the governor of the Negroes. So they are least documented and the most misinterpreted. I'll read you this plaque as well. Florio Hercules, wife of Hercules, governor of the Negroes. In memory of Florio Hercules, wife of Hercules, governor of the Negroes. She died in April of 1749, aged 60. Florio's gravestone in the rear of Yanchinist burial ground, where African Americans are buried, is the earliest known record of Connecticut's black governors. Beginning in the mid-18th century, black Americans throughout New England elected their own leaders or governors in annual festivals based on African celebrations and colonial elections. Respected and trusted by their peers, Connecticut's black governors helped settle disputes and maintain the peace. Florio, also known as Flora, was enslaved by 3 generations of Hallam's. She and Hercules never lived in the same household, nor is Hercules buried beside her, that we know of. Enslavement separated them in death as it did in life. Now, I don't know if you guys can imagine having a spouse that you could never live with, never see, kids that you had to leave behind. That's something I didn't mention about Joan's story. Joan actually had to walk 4 miles both ways and leave her children in enslavement to somebody and walked 4 miles each day to nurse her children. I'm looking at my beautiful children in the back of this room. I could not imagine having to leave them anywhere. You can go to the next slide, please. This is Florio's gravestone in the Ancientist burial ground. I did not put in a picture of the regular gravestone today. It is very sad to look at, but it is still standing. So you can come to New London and you can look at the Ancientist burial ground and see that stone today. And I'm glad actually my cousin's here too, and I got a story about that in here in about a second. But this says just exactly what you saw on the plaque. If we did not have this gravestone and we did not have this plaque, we would never know that Connecticut had Negro governors. What we will also not know is that this office started in Lynn, Massachusetts, that we're aware of, in 1740, okay? So if you look at the plaque, she died in 1749. That means we do not know currently how early Hercules was the Negro governor, when he was elected, who elected him. We have no other records. The story that I kind of want to tell about this burial ground is that my cousin, I remember actually, and I want to say it was about 98, but we may not remember particularly. I remember my cousin and a friend actually having a class project where they had to go up and go to the Ancientist burial ground, and I remember that day very vividly. It was rainy, it was wet, and I was not happy to have to go down there and look up these things. But that is really my earliest, most subtle record of having seen this Negro governor. There are about today, and I'll show you a picture here in a minute, there are about 10 burial grounds, maybe not even, probably 8 burials in the back of that ancient cemetery that are of the Negro section. If we move on to the next slide, you'll see that this is the town's ancient burial place. This burial ground actually was the first burial ground in New London that we're of course aware of. This burial ground was laid out in 1652. We got our newer burial ground, the Cedar Grove Cemetery, in 1852. Now, I think it's the next slide actually that shows the picture. So this burial ground here, as you can imagine, is the burial ground of some of the colonists and the people that were more prominent in New London. Our own Joshua Hempstead was actually buried here up until the 1850s, and he had the family had table stones like the ones that are laying flat over here. But they had those table stones, and they actually got picked up and moved to Cedar Grove Cemetery that opened 200 years later because they were prominent family members and that they were of wealth. I got to tell you, Joshua Hempstead himself did not feel like he was a wealthy man. He did not present himself that way. And at the end of his diary, he actually mentioned a mansion. One thing Joshua Hempstead also does is that he mentions Florio and Hercules' son Abraham. He mentions the name Flora particularly and says that Florio Hercules' son Abraham passes away that day at the age of 27. So as you can imagine, we do not have a lot of record of these people and their lives. I was able to go into some of the records and look up some of those Hallam's that had enslaved Florio, and I was able to find that they also enslaved her daughter Judith. But after they get to a certain age, Florio and Judith are in the records as disposed of. We're not exactly sure what that means for them, but I do know that when Florio was, after she gave birth in some time, she is listed as having acquired the blanket that she gave birth on and the bed that she gave birth on. Those were the 2 things that that family afforded her out of all the things that they could have done after years and years of enslavement. And another fun fact, and what I didn't mention was, I mentioned Joshua Hempstead's 2 grandsons. Adam actually helped to raise those 2 grandsons. But they were actually the descendants and connected to this burial ground story. So they actually would have been next in line to inherit Florio and Judith had that been something that happened if they were not disposed of. Go to the next slide, please. So what we've been doing for the last few years is we've been searching for Hercules. We've been searching for them, a multitude of them. They have been known as governors, kings, and chiefs of the Negroes from 1740 to 1860. We do know that the office ended with a man named Wilson Weston in 1855, and that was the last record that we have of any Negro governors. But people don't seem to know today what the Negro governors actually stood for. Today we have voting rights, and we know that Black Americans had to fight for those for some length of time. This office actually helped propel some of that into the place that we are in today. Next slide, please. So something that the Black governors did while they were up and running their elections, these things would have been held in May and June after the colony's white governors would have been elected. So they fused African and American traditions. They adapted and intervened in the white electoral celebration. So they would have had everybody coming up, but they would have had to be a member. They would have had to be with somebody that was prominent. In some places, you would have had to own a pig for that to be the case, a gun for that to be the case, in order for them to be important. And they exaggerated and satirized by dressing in comical garments. It's funny to me today because when we look at some of the old records and we think about Francis Marion, or you guys might not be familiar with Francis Marion Calkins, I forget we're not in London. Francis Marion Calkins actually wrote the history of New London. In that history of New London, she refers to them and the Negro governors as a sham, a mock dignity, that they were swelling with pomposity and that they found themselves to be of importance when they were not. I hate to tell you folks that the governors were laughing at the colonists. They found it funny because they thought their elections, they thought they were pompous and they thought they were the ones that were pomping and swelling up and not doing what they needed to do. So while the colonists were thinking, oh, we're going to keep them underneath our hand here, they used that as a subtle means of slave control. They could not be controlled, not in that way. They were used to do things like met out punishment to the other enslaved population, go through disputes. They had to be strong. They had to be a strong orator. They had to be well spoken. There were a lot of criteria for these men to be who they were. And they followed a lot of traditions because if you go back to Africa or sometimes in the West Indies, it would have been more of a matrilineal situation. Here, they were not letting the women handle what they needed to handle. So it would have been a lot more of the men. We can move on to the next slide. There are some other local Negro governors. Ira Tossett from Norwich, Deptford Billings from New London, Sutton Brown from Norwich, and Sutton Brown was actually very well remembered by his community. They said that they didn't know any other governor except for Sutton Brown. That was who they remembered. Old Harrow from Pomfret, Moses from Guilford, there's quite a few of them. There was actually a man named London that was actually today, he is still listed as one of the first Negro governors on historic record from Hartford. But we know New London has evidence that Hercules comes from 1749 and was much sooner. And again, that is just when Florio Hercules passes away. So he might have been much earlier. He could have been elected more than once. We just don't know. And Adam Jackson likely would have been at one of those celebrations. We can move on to the next slide. So what we're doing today is we're still having ongoing research for Hercules, his children. We have to look at the records for the Hallam's and the Latimers. Those are the family members that would have enslaved them, that would have kept them under thumb. There are the Prentices. We haven't looked into records for Barbados. We're not even entirely sure where Hercules may have come from at this particular point, but we're still working on that. So the property records are also of extreme importance. We need to be looking at these things. Diaries, such as Joshua Hempstead's. I have been through that diary exhaustively, day in, day out. And when we think we know everything about history, I am here to tell you that we don't. You sometimes need a separate set of eyes, another source to go through those. My friend Tom Shook and I were actually able to find one of the properties on the Black Heritage Trail by me saying something to him one night on a phone conversation, and he went back and said, that's a good idea. I'm going to look through that again. Let me double check. And we were able to find the property based on just having a second set of eyes. Just having somebody listen and just think about it. Probate inventories, last wills and testaments. We need to get these children, the youth, back into reading cursive language. How are they going to read our historic documents? My 14-year-old is in the back of the room. She can read cursive. We probably need to brush up on it. But transcription is not everything. We do stand to have these things misinterpreted if that's all we do. So I look at this as an each one teach one mentality. We need to be on top of the learning. We need to make sure that the sources and the way that we use things in the past are not lost to history. Very important. Newspapers and articles. I spend $60, I think, every month, every 3 months, every 6 months on newspapers.com. Browse them. Look up people in your family. Ask questions. It's very, very important. West Indies records can be a lot harder, but we do have some really great historians who know what they're looking at and who know what they're talking about. So it's very important to also go through those things. One other thing that I wanted to mention is that, again, we do not know where Hercules is buried, but for all we know, Hercules could be right in that cemetery, right next to his wife. Adam Jackson could be right in that cemetery next to some other stones. We don't know, but I will tell you that every single one of you in this room is important. Every single piece of research that you pick up and everything that you search for will help us further our cause. Next slide, please. So again, Hercules and Florio, a family, still a family, despite the time, despite the records, despite the fact that it may have taken over 100 years for their names to be spoken out loud on this earth. Separated in death because of the cruel system of slavery. Freedom is not free, folks. It was not free then. It is not free now. We are still fighting for some of our liberties, and we're going to have to keep fighting, but it's not one of us that gets to do it. It is all of us that needs to do the work. The fact that you're sitting in this room with me today is evidence that is important to you, that it means something to you. And if you don't do it for yourself, do it for the future generations that come after you. Next slide, please. Here's a picture of myself. Actually, in the orange shirt is my friend Tom Shook, who's my co-researcher. In yellow is my cousin Jean Jordan, who gives the burial ground tour, and we will be giving a burial ground tour in September of this year at the Ancients Burial Ground. If you get a chance, please follow the Hempstead Houses page. Come down and take a walk with us. And if you can see me there in the corner, I'm in the black dress. Now, we just looked at the gravestones of the colonists, correct? How many gravestones were there compared to what you see in this picture? I can tell you that Jean is standing in front behind Florio's gravestone. The plaque at Jean's feet is Florio's gravestone. There are 8 to 10 visible plaques in this graveyard. Can you see them? You being here is necessary. The research we need to do is necessary. And I need every single person in this room to pick up something. So, next slide, please. What can we do? There's a call to action. You can learn about the history in your town or towns of interest very close to you. Get excited about it. Find something that grabs your attention and run with it. Ask your elders or your youth about their history. Youth have history too. It might be a day they went through that you didn't know anything about. Ask them. You never know. Who do they remember? What is their best memory regarding that person? What is something you want to know more about? Write things down and organize your information in a timeline. It'll help you and it'll help future generations. Do not underestimate old documents. I don't know if anybody heard about this, but a few years ago in New London, there was a family from Martha's Vineyard that came back while we were researching the Black Heritage Trail and gave up a journal of Black history. Is anybody familiar with the Prudence Crandall School in this room? That transcribed information came from Frederick Olney, the man who was accused of setting fire at the Prudence Crandall School, and he wrote about it in a journal that was in a Black family's basement attic rooms that they had for years. And the lady said, we don't know how we acquired it, but we have it and we want you to have it and we want you to talk about it. A whole group of people in the middle of COVID transcribed that diary, and now we know things we didn't know before. Old documents are important. Ask your family for old letters and a family Bible, if your family has one. And if not, search the historical societies. You would be surprised what they have on your family that you don't know. Our local historical society, I am a board member. They have pictures and evidence and stuff of my family that I didn't even know existed. I'm a historian. I didn't know it existed. Join your local historical society and visit the oldest house in your town. Most importantly, make learning fun, because we need it to be enjoyable in order to continue to do it. I'm not coming out of a rabbit hole anytime soon. One of my kids loves the history that I do, the other one could care less. But in time, she might care a little bit more, and even if she doesn't care a little bit more, one thing she can never say is that she does not know her truth. So, next slide, please. We have a mission, and I'm asking every single one of you to help me find Hercules. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but let us not stop the search for him. Next slide. Again, my name is Nicole Thomas, and I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. Thank you. Any questions?
Well, I just comment, I love your passion, Nicole. I think that was wonderful, and I'm glad I got to come and hear you actually present. I never been one. It drew me in something you said about them being exposed. And I know Connecticut was infamous for shipping people to the West Indies.
Yes.
Selling them through Hartford into the West Indies, or trading Native Americans for Africans.
Yes.
And I know that went on till into the 1800s.
Yes, it did.
So it made me wonder that when you said dispose of, I thought, oh man, did they sell them back into the West Indies? Connecticut did that all the time.
Yes, it did.
And then when you showed that area where there's just no stone, and that struck me too, because I know that that's a commonality that we share with the South, segregated cemeteries and cemeteries that are paved over, or stones that just don't exist anymore. Which made me draw a alignment to yours and this battle between racism in the North and the South, and how it existed here, extreme for so long, and there's elements that you could actually align to your film relative to that stuff. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here, both of you. Thank you. Any other questions?
Do you happen to have a business card?
I don't have a traditional business card, but if anybody has a cell phone, I do have one we can scan. If not, Chris or Kristen could get you my information, and we can definitely get in touch.
Okay, right,
Yes, absolutely. Sure, yes.
When you first mentioned the word, no, actually the sentence, we have to make sure people learn cursive again. Reminded me of a great, I'm smiling, but it's not a good story. We live here in Berlin. We have a friend who lives in Hamden. She ordered some food on the phone. Now, I guess I can't tell you where she lives, but she is in one of a series of apartment buildings. They got a marquee in the front, go up the steps, go inside, and there's the street number on the edge of the marquee. The one next to her is 95, and it's set up, probably know where I'm going with this, it's set up in numbers. The next building, which is hers, was 102. Now, she waited for her food and waited and waited. She finally called the restaurant and said, oh, my driver could not find where you live, so he brought it back. You know what it was? He saw 95, he did not understand. In cursive, they wrote 102. I don't know why they didn't do 102,
Right.
but they wrote the next building's address in cursive. The guy couldn't figure it out, so he went back to the restaurant.
Yeah.
That's something.
It is. It's important that we do that. And you know, one thing I realized, and I've actually been told by our city historian, is, and she's 96 now, she tells me all the time, well, Nicole, they had it in school when I was there, but they took it out when my brother was there. So they've been taking cursive in and out of school for a long time. Today, we need transcribers. We have the National Archive. You can go down and you can help transcribe those documents. But what are we going to do when we have a generation? I mean, we all know that comes eventually. What are we going to do when we have a generation that does not know how to read it? What are we going to do? All of our historic things that haven't been transcribed are now lost to history. We can't afford it. We just can't afford it.
A lot of the college kids, they can't even write their names.
Yeah.
They can't sign their names.
Yeah.
They have to print it.
Yeah, and it's tough. It's, I grew up with cursive. My nonna used to make me sit and practice my penmanship, and you have to practice your penmanship. You need to have nice handwriting. That was something that I really take pride in that. I took pride in it then, and I take pride in it today. And it's important because, not only that, but there's some stones have written in script. You can't, there's a lot of things that we stand to lose. And we already know that there's a lot of stuff, we have sewing classes and things like that. There's a lot of good craft that we don't even have access to today because it was lost to history. I think those things are so important to just bring those back. So we have to think about those things. I just think I wish more people would think about it. But I think about that all the time because I have young girls, and I don't want them to not know how to read stuff one day when I'm not here to help them do it. I think it's important. Any other questions? And if not, I thank you for your time today. I appreciate that. Thanks.
All right, well, our fourth annual Juneteenth is a wrap, and we really appreciate you guys spending the time and spending the afternoon with us. Again, we are having our after party this evening for those of you who want to join us at Veterans Memorial Park. We also have our donation box by the food table if you want to help support our cause. And again, we'll see you next year.